Hello, I'm Neil Whelan, and welcome to the Wesleyan podcast. In this edition, Iain Stevenson, Wesleyan Financial Services Head of Dental, and Regional Manager Neil Richardson are joined by friends of the show, Christie Co, with their Head of Dental, Joel Mannix. For those who don't know them, Christie Co are a specialist business property advisor to dental professionals, and this conversation covers their dental market review and what they, and we here at Wesleyan, are hearing about what's currently impacting practices around the country and what help is available to them. As always, this podcast is for information only and doesn't provide either financial or business planning advice. But if you do feel like you need advice, stay tuned until the end, where I'll let you know how to get in touch with us. And with that, I'll hand you over to Joel, Neil, and first up, Iain.
Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Joel Mannix, who is Head of Dental at Christie Co, and Neil Richardson, who is the Dental Regional Manager at Wesleyan Financial Services. Today we are going to talk about the recent Christie Co dental market review. Before we get to that, Joel, do you want to tell us a bit about Christie Co before we start?
Yeah, thanks, Iain. My name is Joel Mannix. I'm the Head of Dental at Christie Co. I'm currently based up in Scotland, but covering the sort of wider UK market. You might not be able to tell from my accent, but I am based up in Scotland. I moved over here from Australia about 11 years ago, joined Christie Co in 2018 as business agent and covering the Scottish dental market. This year I was promoted to Head of Dental, so covering the wider UK market, as I said, and leading an expert team of regional agents that are dealing with the valuation and sale of businesses of all types, from single surgery practices to larger group transactions.
Thank you, Joel. And Neil?
Super, thanks, Iain. Yeah, so I am Neil Richardson, Regional Manager for Wesleyan. I was a dental specialist financial advisor for 15 years before being promoted to manager 18 months ago, and my role is primarily to lead and manage the advisors in Scotland, Northern Ireland and the north of England, just make sure that they understand all the time what's going on in the dental market and that we're giving the best advice we could possibly give to our dental clients.
Excellent, and thank you both, and I'm delighted to share this time with you. As you know, in dental world, it's an ever-changing world. There's always something going on, always something interesting, always something just around the corner that can impact in all of our worlds here. So I think today is a really good time when we think about this recent change in government and we think about forthcoming budget, etc. It's a really good time to be reflecting and thinking about the dental market review, which was produced by Christie Co. So getting into that, Joel, if I can start with you, please. Just thinking about the current market, could you tell us a little about ownership and composition within the dental market, please?
Yeah, sure. So the UK dental market has about 12,344 practices. We're going through an interesting transition in the market at the moment where it has slightly recalibrated since what we've seen in recent times. In fact, corporate ownership has actually contracted by about 3.3% since last year. What's actually really interesting is the independent market, which remains incredibly strong. So making up of 65% of practices, which is corporate, which is independent ownership. And in fact, if we look at the latter half of last year and the first half of this year, 82% of our offers all came from small groups and independents. That's really important for our sort of buyers for our sellers, because actually these types of clients tend to be a little bit more flexible with some of the post-sale conditions, which I'm sure we'll come on to speak about later on.
Okay, thank you, Joel. I think it's really interesting that the independent ownership of dental practices has remained strong. Neil, what do you think this means for dentists in terms of their financial planning?
Yeah, so I would say it's brilliant news for the UK dental market. We're used to, for many, many years, talking to young associates who want that chance to be a practice owner and have control of the career direction. But what that does really mean is that there's more and more individuals owning practices who therefore need to really think about the ramifications of being a business owner, whether that be as a sole trader, whether that be in a partnership, or whether that be as a director of a limited company. And typically when we advise practice owning clients, we can make three immediate conclusions. First one is that the wealth in terms of the practice's value is vulnerable when considered as a legacy for the family. The second is that their business agreements don't tend to be reflected in their practice and the way that it operates, and therefore could cause financial risk and business process problems. And the last and surprisingly common is that the practice owner doesn't necessarily understand from a tax perspective why they're structured, how they are, and what the implications of that are as well.
Okay, interesting. I'm sure we can expand a bit on those as we go. So thank you, Neil. Joel, how many of these practices are NHS-led compared to private or mixed practices? What are the current market dynamics as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, there has been a significant shift towards sort of private and mixed practices over NHS-led practices. However, what I would say is that transaction volumes overall have surged by 150% in the latter half of last year. We've seen a number of things driving that, but I think the biggest thing which we were heavily involved in was probably a landmark corporate divestment process which we drove last year, and that led to a huge increase in independent ownership. You often saw practices that were sort of struggling in sort of more regional areas, and local associates, perhaps working in the area or even within the practice themselves, taking on those opportunities and really ingraining themselves into not only the community but also the dental practice as a whole. So we're really seeing the sort of surge of independent owners. And as I said, whilst there is a shift towards private mixed, I mean, the NHS-led practices are still of a premium.
Yeah, that makes sense, Joel. Thank you for that. So Neil, as far as the shift towards private and mixed practices over NHS dentistry, what does that mean in terms of financial planning for those that are involved in that? What should they be aware of?
Okay, so it's really, really common for dentists to kind of look at private practice and see that potential for that greater qualitative aspect of their working life, that bit more enjoyment to do the dentistry they want to do, and have that little bit more discretion. And that obviously is great from a life perspective. But when they make that move from private to NHS, what they're doing is they're removing effectively a safety net of a number of NHS benefits that relate to sick pay, long-term ill health, death whilst of working age, and then obviously the pension aspect of being an NHS dentist as well. So dentists moving increasingly to private practice needs to really carefully think about the loss of the benefits. It's quite likely that the financial advisor will have built into their existing planning a series of assumptions around those benefits existing and complementing their other planning. And so anyone making that kind of change needs to make sure they go and get advice to say, if I no longer have these or I have these benefits in a decreased capacity, what impact does it have on my planning, and what impact would it have on my family if something happened? So really important one.
Thank you, Neil. Joel, turning to the dental market review again, what does that say about the average dental practice valuation?
Review, it says that our average dental practice valuation increased by 1.32 million in 2023, but I would obviously like to caveat that with, obviously there's a number of factors that go into that. What we have seen is a huge demand for valuations, especially in the London and Southeast regions. Obviously, population's a big thing there, but I suppose the sort of nature of those areas sort of drives a lot more transactional activity.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you, Joel. Neil, how would you say that practice valuation can impact dentists in terms of retirement planning and exit strategies then?
Yeah, so I think for every single practice owner I ever met when I was an advisor, the final practice sale was a massive piece of their overall planning for retirement. And as a financial player, we see those sales proceeds get used in a massive variety of ways. Typically, the wealth doesn't just impact the financial future of that individual owner, it spreads throughout the family and the wider family as well. And that happens on an ongoing basis, both at the initial point of retirement or sale, and then also all the way through retirement to eventual death, unfortunately. The biggest positive of having a practice to sell at retirement is typically when we look at Joel's and Christie's report and we look at the average figure of 1.32 million as a net sale value, it means that the owner has that ability to forget about some of the concerns that the average member of the public has in terms of planning for retirement. So they're not worrying about meeting bills month to month or funding buckets planning or supporting children. So it causes a slightly different problem, the size of that potential sale, which is how do you actually make sure that you get the most from that wealth and also make sure that it goes to the people that you love in the most efficient way possible?
Okay, I think definitely people in that position, then you're looking at them just asking themselves some pretty serious questions in terms of what happens at that point or what happens later in life. So yeah, some really good points there. Thank you. Joel, in terms of the lending landscape, what are the trends at the moment in terms of borrowing and lending at the moment?
We've often spoken about dentistry being a green light sector from lenders. In fact, we've seen strong lending appetite from banks, with 94% of banks expecting increased lending in the dental sector. Finance availability does remain a key driver for practice acquisitions and growth. And you know what I would say is lenders do want to do bigger deals. I think there's often a bit of a stigma attached to it, particularly what we've went through since the last sort of 18 months, I suppose, since Trustonomics, as we like to coin it. But lenders do want to do bigger deals as well. So actually, sometimes those deals are actually easier to lend via your broker, because it is that green light sector. I would also say that we're seeing a number of smaller transactions be funded as well.
Okay, thank you, Joel. So Neil, what's your experience of that? What does that mean for our dental clients from your perspective?
So yeah, I would just stress that any dentists borrowing to buy a practice really make sure that they take advice to ensure that that finance that they've taken is properly protected. Typically what we see on the terms that the banks supply for lending is that they'll insist that the person borrowing it takes some life cover to match the loan. And it's really important that people borrowing put that in their head and go, what I'm seeing here is a term that protects the bank. It's not to protect me. It's not to protect my business. The bank is basically just making sure that you've got life cover that pays them back if something happens to you to repay the finance. It doesn't then necessarily deal with the impact on the business from a wider perspective. It doesn't necessarily deal with how another partner in the business might buy your share of the business out. Also doesn't necessarily think about the impact on your family's future long term. So it's just the importance of remembering that when you're making that decision to buy and you're borrowing, as crazily busy a time as that is and as difficult as it is, make sure you take that step back from the process and think about the wider aspects of it and the potential connotations of it.
Yeah, excellent, Neil. Makes perfect sense. Joel, so what does the report note on the pricing trends?
Yeah, a really good question. We saw the market go through a recalibration post the 2023 mini budget Trustonomics, as we like to say before, but we've seen those prices stabilizing now. What I would say, the valuation gap between those sort of group practices and that sort of arbitrage and single assets is narrowing. What I think is really important at the moment, particularly with rising costs, is the impact on EBITDA margins. That has become more important than ever before. You know, we talk about multiples, they've largely remained similar. However, what we're now multiplying has become incredibly important. So what I would say is that if you are looking at your costs, it is very important that you have a plan in action, particularly if some of those start to spiral, and have an answer in place.
Yeah, again, excellent advice there. It's really interesting to see the trends in that area, isn't it? Joel, if I can just stick with you, if that's okay. So if we turn our attention to the kind of sentiment survey, what were the most significant points it revealed from your perspective?
Yeah, we had a really positive sentiment from the sector. There is an increased demand for both NHS and high-end treatments. As I said before, it's a green light sector in both terms of financial, but also sort of treatment perspective as well. Digital dentistry and the therapist-led NHS treatment will be seen as key growth areas in the future. We talk about sort of impacts on rising costs. There's a couple of things right there that can help with that. What is been very interesting for both of our perspectives is that within the next 3 years, 52% of those practice owners that that have gone through the survey have actually said that they're looking to either buy or sell over that period. So we are expecting more and more transactional activity.
Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful. It's helpful from our perspective as well, to get a real kind of sense of the feeling, the sentiments. That I think is a really interesting point to just look at and digest. From an advice perspective, it definitely helps ensure that we are taking the full picture into account. Neil, what's your view on that?
So I'd just give a quick summary and say that the podcast's a brilliant chance for owner dentists to just step back, think about things outside of the bubble of your normal work pressures, and ask yourself some key questions as a business owner. And Joel hit on a great one with talking about the expenses and the trend with expenses as well. But the questions I would go with is really kind of, have I genuinely thought of everything? Has someone sense checked that for me? And what other input have I had to say that what I've thought here and what I've understood as the risks of the business are right? Do I know what's in all my legal agreements with my partners or the other directors, but also the associates? Do I understand how the wealth of my practice passes to my family if something happens, and how that would actually be facilitated by maybe another partner buying you out? And then lastly, assuming everything goes to plan and you get to the goal retirement age and sell, do I understand how that potential future value fits in with your aspirations for the dream that you have for retirement? They're the key questions everyone should be stepping back and asking themselves from this.
Neil, thank you so much. That was really helpful. Joel, thank you for your, again, wonderful insight, and indeed to everyone at Christie Co who helped put the dental market review together. If you haven't seen a copy yet, I would suggest you get one. It is really interesting reading and helps to give a real perspective on what's going on in the world of dentistry at this time. Thank you both for your expert opinions. Thanks for your views. And I look forward to discussing another subject at some point in the future with both of you. Thank you.
And that's our show for this week. Thank you to Iain, Neil and Joel. If you are looking for expert financial advice for you or your practice, go to wesleyan.co.uk, where you can book a no-obligation appointment with one of our specialist financial advisors. To learn more about Wesleyan more generally, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you found the podcast useful, you can like and subscribe to us on all the usual podcast platforms, as well as find us on YouTube, where there's a whole library of videos covering a wide range of financial planning topics. But that's it for now. So until next time, thanks for listening.